The doctor's words from 2 years ago still haunted every relationship Hazel attempted. Severe uterine abnormalities. Your pelvic structure is too small. Natural conception is highly unlikely. She'd avoided telling Grayson for 6 months, watching him work with horses on his family's Montana ranch, while knowing the truth would end everything. His father spoke constantly about grandchildren carrying on the Clearwater legacy. 4 generations of horsemen, all expecting the same from Grayson's future wife. When she finally confessed, voice breaking on the words, "I'm not breeding material," she expected him to let her go. Instead, Grayson pulled her into his arms and said something that shattered everything she believed about her worth. What happened next challenged every toxic narrative she'd internalized about being defective. Hazel Winters stood in the doorway of the barn at Clearwater Ranch, watching Grayson work with the new Appaloosa mare. March sunshine streamed through the open doors, illuminating dust motes and the powerful grace of man and horse moving in harmony. 6 months she'd been coming to this ranch, 6 months of falling deeper for a man whose family legacy stretched back 4 generations of Montana horsemen, and 6 months of carrying a secret that grew heavier with every day. At 28, Hazel had learned to hide her petite frame's limitations well, 5'2" with a slender build that had always made her look younger than her years. The doctor's words from 2 years ago still echoed in her mind. Severe uterine abnormalities. Natural conception highly unlikely. Even with intervention, carrying to term would be extremely risky given your pelvic structure. She'd been with her ex-fiancé then. He'd left within 3 months, citing incompatibility with his life goals. Translation, she couldn't give him the children he wanted. "Hazel!" Grayson's voice pulled her from the spiral. He stood by the mare, one hand on her neck, his smile lighting up his weathered face. At 35, Grayson Clearwater embodied everything Montana horsemen should be: tall, strong, patient, with calloused hands that could gentle the wildest horse or hold her face with devastating tenderness. Come meet her properly. Aurora's finally starting to trust." Hazel crossed the barn, her heart aching. She'd avoided this conversation for months, let herself fall in love while knowing it was built on borrowed time. The Clearwater family had owned this ranch since 1891. Grayson's father spoke constantly about grandchildren carrying on the legacy. His mother had already mentioned how good Hazel would be with babies. She reached the stall, and Grayson's arm came around her waist naturally, pulling her close. She fit against him like she'd been designed for that exact spot, which made what she had to say even harder. "She's beautiful," Hazel whispered, stroking Aurora's soft nose. "Like someone else I know," Grayson murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. The words she'd been rehearsing for weeks caught in her throat. Not yet. Just a few more moments of this perfect illusion before reality shattered everything. That evening, Grayson's parents invited them for dinner at the main house, a sprawling log home that had sheltered 5 generations of Clearwaters. His mother, Patricia, served pot roast while his father, Thomas, dominated conversation with plans for expanding the horse breeding program. "Grayson's always had the gift," Thomas said, his weathered face proud, just like his grandfather. "And someday his sons will have it too. It's in the blood." Hazel's fork clattered against her plate. The sound seemed deafening in the sudden silence. "You all right, dear?" Patricia asked, concern creasing her kind features. Excuse me." Hazel stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her water glass. She fled to the porch, gulping the cold Montana air. Grayson found her minutes later, leaning against the railing and staring at the Bridger Mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Hazel, what's wrong?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I can't have children, Grayson. I'm infertile. The doctors told me 2 years ago. My uterus is malformed. My pelvis is too small. I can't carry a pregnancy. I can't give you the legacy your family expects. I can't..." Her voice broke. Grayson stepped closer, but she held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. I know what this means. Your family's entire identity is about continuing the bloodline, raising children who'll run this ranch. And I can't be part of that. Tears streamed down her face now. My body's too small, Grayson. I'm not breeding material for a horseman's wife. I'm defective. Stop! His voice cut through her spiral with gentle firmness. Hazel, look at me. She couldn't. Shame burned through her chest, the familiar narrative she'd internalized playing on repeat. Worthless, inadequate, broken. Grayson moved closer, and then his hands were on her shoulders, turning her to face him. When she still wouldn't meet his eyes, he cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice steady and sure. You are not defective. You are not inadequate. And you are sure as hell not defined by what your body can or cannot do reproductively. But your family, my family will adjust their expectations. And if they can't, that's their problem to work through, not yours. His grey eyes held hers with intensity that made her breath catch. Hazel, I fell in love with you. Not your uterus, not your potential as a baby maker. You, your laugh, your kindness, the way you see straight through my bullshit, how you talk to the horses like they're old friends. That's what matters. You say that now, Hazel whispered. But later I'll still love you, Grayson said firmly. That's not changing. The following Sunday, Grayson called a family meeting. Hazel sat beside him on the couch in the main house, her hands trembling in her lap. Thomas and Patricia sat across from them, confusion evident on their faces. Mom, Dad, Grayson began, his hand finding Hazel's and squeezing. There's something we need to discuss, something that affects our future and your expectations. He explained everything with calm directness. Hazel's diagnosis, her fears, the weight she'd been carrying. Patricia's eyes grew soft with understanding, but Thomas's expression hardened. I see, Thomas said when Grayson finished. The silence that followed felt suffocating. So there won't be biological grandchildren, no continuation of the Clearwater bloodline. Thomas, Patricia started. No, Patricia, this is important. He looked at Hazel, and she saw disappointment in his eyes that cut like a knife. I'm not going to lie and say this doesn't change things. This ranch has been in our family for over a century. Every generation has passed it down to their children. That's the legacy. Hazel stood abruptly. I understand. I'll go. Sit down, Thomas said, his tone sharp enough that she froze. Then his expression softened slightly. Please. She sat. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I built my entire identity around being a father who'd pass this ranch to his son, who'd pass it to his children. For 63 years, that's been my vision of the future. He paused, rubbing his weathered face. But you know what? I'm realizing that vision was always about me, my ego, my need for immortality through bloodline. He looked at Grayson, then Hazel. My son is in love with a woman who makes him happier than I've seen him in years, a woman who treats our horses with respect and kindness, a woman who's been carrying this burden alone, terrified of not being good enough for us. His voice roughened. Hazel, I'm sorry. I'm sorry my words about grandchildren and legacy made you feel like your worth was tied to reproduction. That was wrong. Tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks. Patricia moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. There are many ways to build a family, dear. Adoption, fostering, mentoring young riders who need guidance. The Clearwater legacy isn't just about blood. It's about these values, this love of horses and land. Those can be passed on to anyone. But what if, Hazel's voice cracked, what if part of you always resents me, always wonders what might have been with someone else? Thomas met her eyes steadily. Then that would be my failing, not yours. and I'd work on it every damn day until I got it right. 2 weeks later, Hazel stood in the round pen with Grayson, watching him work with a traumatized rescue horse named Jasper. The gelding had been severely abused, arrived at Clearwater Ranch 3 months ago, barely able to tolerate human presence. Now Jasper stood calmly as Grayson approached, accepting touch without flinching. "You see that?" Grayson called to Hazel. "He's learning his value isn't determined by what he can do for us. He doesn't have to perform or produce to deserve care and love. He just has to exist. That's enough." Hazel understood the parallel immediately. She'd been coming to the ranch every day since the family conversation, watching Grayson work, talking with Patricia about alternative paths to family, slowly letting herself believe she might actually deserve this love. But the old narratives died hard. "Grayson," she said that evening as they sat on his porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold, "I need to know something. Honestly. Does part of you mourn the biological children we won't have?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I mourn the society that made you believe your worth is tied to reproduction. I mourn that you've spent years thinking you're less than because of something completely beyond your control. I mourn that my family's expectations contributed to that pain." He turned to face her fully. "But do I mourn not having biological children with you? No, because that was never what I wanted most." "What do you want most?" "You," he said simply. "A partnership built on mutual respect and love. A life where we support each other, build something meaningful together, maybe help kids who need it through fostering or mentoring. A future where you wake up every morning knowing your value isn't conditional on what your body can produce." Hazel felt something crack open in her chest, the armor she'd built around her heart, the shame she'd carried like a second skin. "I spent 2 years believing I was broken," she whispered. "My ex-fiancé left. I avoided relationships. I told myself no man would really want me once he knew the truth. Then those men were fools," Grayson said firmly, "because you're not broken, Hazel. You're whole exactly as you are. Your value as a human being, as my partner, as yourself, none of that is determined by your reproductive system." She looked at this man who'd chosen her completely and without reservation, and felt tears streaming down her face again. But this time, they weren't tears of shame. "I love you," she said, "and I'm starting to believe that might actually be enough." "It's more than enough," Grayson said, pulling her close. "It's everything." 3 months later, Hazel stood in front of the mirror in Grayson's bedroom, studying her reflection. The small frame that had always felt like a failure now looked different to her eyes. Still petite, still slender, but no longer inadequate. She'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in medical trauma and infertility. Patricia had connected her with a support group of women navigating similar diagnoses. Slowly, painfully, she was unlearning the toxic narratives about her worth. Outside, she could hear Grayson working with the horses. The sound of his voice, patient, encouraging, steady, had become the soundtrack of her healing. She found him in the barn with Aurora, who was now fully gentled and pregnant with her first foal. "Perfect timing," Grayson said, smiling. "I wanted to talk to you about something." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. Inside was paperwork from a Montana foster care agency. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about what Mom said, about other ways to build family. There are kids who need stable homes, who need to learn about horses and land and what it means to be valued unconditionally." He paused. "I wanted to know if you'd be interested in exploring fostering, maybe eventually adoption. No pressure. This is just one option. But it feels right to me." Hazel looked at the paperwork, at this man who kept choosing her over and over, and felt her heart expand. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." Grayson's face lit up. Then he sobered slightly. "Hazel, I need you to understand something. Even if we never foster or adopt, even if it's just us and the horses for the rest of our lives, that's enough. You're enough. Your body doesn't owe me or anyone else biological children. Your worth isn't tied to reproduction or functionality or meeting anyone's expectations except your own. The words she'd feared saying that night on his parents' porch echoed in her mind. My body's too small, Horseman. I'm not breeding material. But now she understood the truth. Her body was exactly as it should be, not too small, not inadequate, just hers. And that was enough. I know, she said quietly. I'm finally starting to believe it. Grayson pulled her into his arms, holding her with the same gentle strength he showed the traumatized horses he rehabilitated. In that embrace, Hazel felt something fundamental shift. Not healing. Healing was ongoing, would be ongoing for years, but acceptance, self-love, the understanding that she was valuable not for what she could produce, but for who she was. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For loving all of me, not just the convenient parts. For showing me that my value isn't conditional. Grayson tilted her chin up, his grey eyes serious. That's not something to thank me for, Hazel. That's just recognizing the truth. You've always been worthy. You just needed time to believe it. As the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, Hazel stood in the arms of a man who'd chosen her completely and let herself finally, truly believe she deserved it.